Hi all, let's have a look at the interesting clash in round 1 between Vladimir Kramnik and Michael Adams, who's the top UK player, of course. Michael Adams 2745, Vladimir Kramnik, a former world chess champion, 2783. So Vladimir playing white, kicked off with knight f3. Adams reacted to this in a solid, logical manner. He played d5. We're in Catalan territory, potentially. g3, or King's Indian attack. Not really identifiable at the moment, but this is kind of a King's Indian attack system, especially if white followed up with d3. But white is often using this move order to just get into a Catalan. Here we see the move e6, volunteering to close up the bishop. So maybe the bishop's going to come out like this later, or like this. So the Cg8 bishops are often a classic problem here. But black's development is very sensible, very logical, very trodden actually. It's only weakening the dark squares. I just want to illustrate that with these colours here. That the only thing black's done to compromise his position in a very, very subtle manner is some dark square weaknesses with this pawn chain. But that's the price of just developing the pieces and castling. We have a Catalan position, c4, castles, d4, and we're transposing right into a very typical Catalan position now, where black is often taking now on c4. And white actually usually plays queen c2 here. This is the most common move, queen c2. But another quite popular move is knight e5. And there's quite an interesting twist here. Adams plays the most popular response, knight c6. And often knight takes c6 is played. But the second most popular move is chosen by Vladimir. He volunteers giving up his light square bishop. And ordinarily you might think, well, these light square weaknesses, is that going to rebound on white? But it really depends if black's ever in a position to mount a significant attack. So here we see, what is the point of this anyway? Well, it's fracturing black's structure, and it's also winning that dark square bishop. Here, knight takes e7, this is the point. So that was the very subtle faint weaknesses from earlier. The dark squares in black's position here are all potential sensitive points, because white also has that dark square bishop right now. But more crucially, immediately, is black with his splintered pawns. That c4 pawn is particularly vulnerable. White targets it with actually the move knight a3. So knight a3, and we see the reaction c5. Now if white took this pawn with knight takes c4, that would lead to a pin like this, which might be a little bit unpleasant. So Vladimir actually delays getting his pawn back. He takes on c5 first. After queen takes c5, okay, it's actually equal on pawns now, but white has the superior structure. And after bishop e3, you might think, why has white played like this? Queen c6 seems entirely logical, just to put a battery on the light squares, forcing a move like f3, which you might not think is particularly good looking. On the other hand, you know, black hasn't got the dark square bishop, so does it matter to play a move like f3 if it's not going to be tactically destroyed? Unless there's some other major tactics. You know, is this diagonal such a crucial issue here for this battery? So we get a curious game, which you know, is not like a Mikhail Tal game. It's just like a more of a Botvinnik game, a very positional Botvinnik game. But does white really have an advantage? White attacks this pawn, and black reacts by threatening mate, bishop b7 to threaten queen g2 or queen h1. White parries that, and now it's black's turn to defend this pawn. And he does so with bishop a6. It is a bit of a loose pawn. There's actually a tactic here which changes the configuration of the pieces. At the moment it's knights and opposite coloured bishops. The pieces are identical. White actually creates an important imbalance here with a tactic which doesn't actually win material, it just changes the material imbalance. Can you spot what white plays in this position if I give you 5 seconds starting from now? Okay, knight takes c4. It's a temporary piece sack. Bishop takes c4. And now the move Queen d4, powerful centralizing move, going to get the bishop back. Rook fc8. Yes, and now it's quite a delayed way of regaining the piece, b3. But black has a move here, and white has some loose pawns actually, e2 and a2. And it seems entirely logical black's next move to target both of them simultaneously, queen a6. So we're left with a position now with white actually regaining his piece, and it's also kind of mission accomplished. He's changed the configuration here. Now after queen takes a2, we have the bishop versus the knight. But is that really enough to win such a game against Michael Adams, you know, the top UK player here? Is this small advantage enough? And in fact, the queen might not be threatened in queen takes e2 here, because there's always rook f2 trapping the queen. Just to demonstrate that, I'll just give a token outrageous move. This position here just traps the queen. But Vladimir protects this with his king anyway. He's freeing up a rook by doing this. He wants, for example, rook fd1 could be useful to dominate the d file. But okay, black has got an asset, the outside pass pawn, you'd think. On the other hand, this f6 knight is a target on the dark square. There's bishop g5, but black isn't in a great position here to do anything actually about bishop g5. For example, h6, I believe bishop takes h6 would be good. So what can black do in fact about bishop g5? It seems quite a painful bishop, even though it doesn't seem as though there's so many dark square weaknesses in black's position. It's quite fascinating. Okay, so what we get here, and also if we consider a move like rook d8, you might think isn't that logical? Well, possibly this pawn is under scrutiny with a move like queen a1 or even queen c3. But queen a1 is even a neater trick. This kind of position could end up seeing the a7 pawn as a viable target. For example, like this, sees the a7 pawn as a target. So the bishop, you know, is actually a nuisance. It's creating these potential threats or targets, especially on the dark squares. So anyway, this next move, it takes the pawn to a5 away from the glare of the bishop. But we do see bishop g5. Now a tactical move is played defending f6 here without having to move the knight to the back row or anything. Just e5, it's a tactical move. It would spell disaster if queen takes e5. That would run into a skewer, which I hope you can see. If I give you 5 seconds. Yeah, rook e8. So white doesn't really want to end up getting mated here, particularly. But, you know, a curious infiltration move is played in this position, which is queen d6. Fascinating. So white is now again threatening bishop takes f6, which I think is more important than black like taking on c4. He's got to really attend to this. Surely this bishop takes f6, it would absolutely crunch black's pawn structure and expose his king. So what seemed initially as a small positional advantage, this seems quite vicious actually, in particular the f6 square here. So Adams has to react quickly. He attacks the queen. The queen keeps the pressure on f6 by playing to b6, so keeping that pressure. And is also eyeing, of course, some useful dark square targets as well. a5, d8, f6 are all dark square targets. And it's a very tricky position. And black falters a little bit. I think this next move is an inaccuracy. Michael Adams plays rook ab8 just to kick the queen, maybe expecting the queen would just go back and it would be an okay position for black. a4, and there's prospects like rook b3. But unfortunately, a cold shower is put to rook ab8 here. Can you see what the cold shower move is? If I give you 5 seconds here, what does white play in this position? Okay, there's a slight back row weakness, rook fd1. So if this takes, then black gets back row mated like that. And yeah, it's a neat tactic. If it takes here and it's not check because the king's off the first rank, then here mating. after knight e8. So that's a really unfortunate move, which seizes a little bit more positional advantage. Black plays rook e8, so it's been white has that dominance now on the d file for a moment. The queen retreats to e3. But is this really that bad? Did white really achieve anything major? Well, the thing is, unfortunately, black is still left with this position now. He can't even play knight e8. No knight d7. This knight is stuck. I think it's pretty pointless to play knight h5, maybe just g4. So the knight's pretty stuck actually here. I think also there's things like rook d2 to protect e2. So it's a difficult position just because of this dark square bishop and the pressure on f6. What does black actually do here? Black played a4. It seems very, very risky indeed now to allow this doubling of pawns. So bishop takes, g takes. There's some very horrible consequences of this. Queen e4 is played, which means that the rook is now freed up. The queen's protecting the pawn. So rook a1's possible next. Or things like rook d7 and queen g4 trying to get to the king, you know, like this. Some targeting on light squares now. We see a3 and in fact rook d7. So white's immediately threatening something like queen g4 check and queen h5. Very dangerous stuff if the king was going to f8. Rook bd8 trying to challenge this rook on the 7th. The rook stays on the 7th and dominates a8 here. Look, the queen's dominating a8. There's no challenge of rook a8. So white has generated some great tactical opportunities now as well. Queen b2 hitting the rook. The rook attacks the queen, and it's a pretty desperate position. Probably technically best is for black to play queen d4 check. He didn't do that actually. Adams played another move, f5. Let's have a quick look at queen d4 check. If white takes with the e pawn, rook takes a3 clearly, and there's nothing for black there. And if he takes with the d rook takes d4. This position is a better rook and pawn ending for white. Probably a long grind would ensue, but probably white's going to end up winning that. It's white's going to win this pawn, have this pawn protected, and maybe march the king, especially the light squares. This structure, it does not bode well usually in an endgame. So yeah, that wasn't too attractive for black to play queen d4, even though technically it might have been the best move here. Black played f5. We have rook takes b2, f takes, rook takes a3. So white to pawn up in a rook and pawn ending, but you might think, isn't there drawing chances? This is quite a dangerous passed pawn though. Rook d4, it's protected. Rook c8, it's pushed. So white's a pawn up, e takes, rook takes, and these pawns are not ideal. This e5 is particular, you know, sensitive at the moment. But black plays rook c6. And here white forces off another pair of rooks actually with rook d3. There's no way black should allow rook d7. If, for example, rook a4, rook d5, and that pawn's sensitive, if the rook goes in front, then this pawn's going, and if f6, then that's weakened the second rank. So rook d7 looks really good, and try and make the black king after, etc. So here it's basically forcing off a pair of rooks, and now this would be a nice king march. Just to herd the pawn, black plays f5, but now a crushing move. Can you see, to win this ending, to make sure the king is going to be really active in this ending to help herd the pawn? Can you see what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, a very neat endgame move to emphasize king quality. Although the king was stopped from using the e4 square, in fact, now with d4, the temporary pawn sacrifice, fantastic version of events. Now the king can come like this, glide on the light squares. So for example, e takes king e2, and the king's got this route or this route available. Michael Adams actually forfeited on time here, but it's a very, very difficult position. I think this is now a very clear decisive advantage actually for white in this endgame. It's clear that the king's going to come up here and it's going to start holding the pawn. It's going to be very, very difficult to save this position. Black's pawns here are also quite vulnerable. They're not connected or anything. So white might even combine the pawn with trying to win f5, for example, pretty soon. It's a pretty nasty position, for example, here. It just looks as though it's going downhill. Okay, yeah, it was a strange, like, positional game, quite profound little positional game. And you know, to club players, some of the decisions like bishop takes c6, they're a bit Petrosian-esque actually. I've seen some games of Petrosian where he's giving up his light square bishop and fracturing, you know, the opponent's pawns and winning like that after. But here, yeah, it seems the bishop versus knight configuration, which you might think is like a minute advantage, it did seem to have very concrete examples of destructive damage, like on the f6 square, which was evidenced, of course, in the game, which led to the win. So yeah, this is what sometimes high-level chess is about, these kind of very small advantages and these very paradoxical moves that you normally wouldn't even consider, like giving up your light square bishop here. But Vladimir is using these paradoxical moves and using these seemingly small advantages, and they seem to, you know, in this case, transition into a winning ending. It has to be said, though, that most of the counters between these two are often draws. The decisive results are few and far between, but this was one of them. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.